Welcome to installment number 2 of what we're calling the Lowdown, right here with UFC superstar lightweight Joe Lozon, taking a look at the latest happenings in the UFC octagon. UFC 180 is on the slate as Fabricio Verdum takes the interim heavyweight title. Joe, they wanted less formal from me, so I can be less fucking formal. Let's just hang out. What do you say?
I like it. I like it.
All right. So, Verdum, what stood out?
Verdum was really impressive. So for me, when I go into a fight, I know that Verdum's got good stand-up, but I know he's got amazing jiu-jitsu. He's really, really good on the ground. And, I think he was patient. He was getting tuned up a little bit. Like, he was eating some shots. Hunt dropped him a few times. Hunt was, pretty much almost like he was toying with him a little bit on the stand-up end. And then just blasting him with a knee. It was pretty awesome. I'm a huge Verdum fan. Probably a bigger Mark Hunt fan, just because the whole super small thing is just amazing. But I thought it was an awesome fight. What do you think?
Yep. Well, I mean, of course it was a impressive performance, but Verdum looked like he was reverting to that Alistair Overeem Strike Force Verdum in that first frame, where he kept getting pinged and he'd lay on the ground for a second as if this doesn't hit the floor voluntarily on Mark Hunt's behalf, I'm in trouble. And then when it did hit the floor and Hunt got the takedown, I don't know why, I'd be very interested in what you think about it. Verdum couldn't get anything going with his guard. What was that all about?
So the big thing on when you're talking like jiu-jitsu and being on the ground is like the fence is like a huge factor. In jiu-jitsu tournaments, or even a fight when you're off the fence, you're able to move your hips. You're able to pivot on your back. And you always talk about in jiu-jitsu, like a lot of times the quality of a jiu-jitsu fighter, especially off his back, is how well he moves his hips and he's able to move his head back and forth. And you attack one direction, you go back the other direction, and it just becomes a game of switching side to side. But when you have the fence, you can't do that because your head gets stuck. So you get stuck kind of off at one angle, and you're not really able to turn the way you want. And Mark Hunt did a great job. He did a really good job about putting Verdum on the fence, not letting him kind of rotate and swivel and pivot on his back. And it really shut down Verdum. I was screaming at the TV because. Mark
That's what we want. Moments where you're screaming at the TV. That's what we want.
Yeah, I mean, it's always good when you're and I wasn't even that invested, but it's an exciting fight when you're yelling at the TV. But Mark Hunt is hitting him Verdum with shots. He's pretty much picking him anywhere he wants, drops him a few times, and then he shoots like a double leg and blasts him and takes him down. And I'm like, what are you doing? But he did a good job. He did a great job on the ground. He did a great job, not getting submitted. He wasn't all that effective. I think he should have maybe, hit a takedown but then immediately get back up, but it did an awesome job.
Now, why was he able to land at the first? What stand out about Mark Hunt's timing and I guess punch placement, for lack of a better word, that caught up to Verdum? Because he was very hard for Travis Brown to hit and a lot of other high-level guys.
Stand-up wise, it just comes down to, he's just such an amazing kickboxer. He's got like that coconut on his head a little bit where, someone that's got a really good chin, really strong neck. He's eating like really big shots from a lot of really tough, good guys. And he just, kind of shrugs it off and doesn't really care. Doesn't really get bothered by it all that much.
So it has a lot to do with his ability to absorb punches more than it does the way he throws.
A little bit of both. I mean, he moves his head really well. Last night happened to hurt him a little bit, because he dipped a little bit low and ate a knee. And that's kind of like a common thing that he does a lot. Like he's definitely one of those guys, like he'll sit in the pocket and he'll just kind of rock his shoulders back and forth and he'll get a little bit lower, and like you watch like old school like Mike Tyson fights and things like that, and he was always like dipping his head like way underneath, and we always say like it's effective for boxing, but it'll get you in a lot of trouble in MMA when someone comes up with the knee, and and Hunt paid for it, even though he could have been needing it in kickboxing, his other things, he's gotten away with it for a long time, but eventually it caught up to him.
It was interesting because I kept hearing Verdum in the post-fight and stuff talk over and over again about how he faked a takedown before letting that knee go. I didn't see it. I just saw Hunt start to load up for an uppercut and Verdum launch into action. It seemed like Hunt had just turned his body ever so slightly to deliver an uppercut. Now, whether he was going for that because he thought a takedown was coming, I couldn't tell. But did you see a fake takedown attempt from Verdum before that knee? Because I didn't, but I'm just a layman,
I didn't see it. However, sometimes things are really subtle. There's all kinds of things that happen in fights sometimes. Like maybe just like eyes look down, or a little change of levels that's really subtle, or a step or something like that really makes a difference. I didn't see it, but it worked. This could definitely be one of those cases of like what I was talking about last week about how sometimes fighters will say in a post fight, we tried to do this and then it worked out perfectly, and sometimes that's the case, sometimes it's not the case. But a lot of times, like in fights, like you're kind of like maybe Verdum Verdum was just thinking about trying to start showing the takedown a little bit and then coming up and just before it happened, Hunt went low and he came high.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to see Verdum put that Muay Thai together. I mean, considering how one-dimensional he used to be. I mean, your memories of Verdum when he was Krokop's jiu-jitsu coach and he was, hunting arm bars all day in the Pride ring and little else. I mean, even his first UFC run, he just had very little to offer standing, and now he's potent.
Yeah, he's made big gains. But it's I feel like that's kind of like more the normal thing now. I think that everyone, the days of being like super one-sided and having like, okay, I have one skill set and I'm just going to make people play my game is gone. Even Hunt, who was a K1 kickboxer, and I definitely don't think he's jiu-jitsu whiz, but he was sprawling like crazy. He was hitting takedowns, and not just in this fight, but in previous fights too. I've been impressed by his takedown defense and his ability, especially on the fence. Kind of like just pushing people in the fence and bumping people into it, and then shooting double legs and ripping their legs out, and it's good. It's really good.
Now, how does he do against Kane? I mean, did you see anything in this fight that Kane, like a sort of a door that opened in this fight that Kane just walks right through when they fight?
For Verdum or for
Verdum?
For Verdum. Well, for me, the big thing is the fact that he got taken down very easily several times by Hunt. Now that could be that one, he wanted to be taken down, which I wouldn't be surprised at. Like if I was fighting Mark Hunt and I was a heavyweight, because I'm not stepping near him as a lightweight. Yeah. But if I were fighting Hunt and I have a huge advantage in jiu-jitsu wise, I'm not necessarily going to frown on a takedown. I mean, I don't think it does Verdum much good to start sprawling on takedowns when Hunt is blasting him left and right on the feet. I would rather have someone in my guard and be on the ground when I'm a jiu-jitsu guy. So it's kind of tough to tell, but if Hunt took him down so easily and he didn't want to be there, then it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. That was my first thought too. And Kane is no slouch at pinning your head up against the fence either. When he's torturing somebody, you're on the wall for better or for worse. So I can definitely see that scenario play out. Now, Joe, I understand you have a lot to say about Kelvin Gastelum, who looked incredible last night against Jake Ellenberger. Really a breakthrough moment for him. And I just want you to just start talking about Kelvin.
I love Kelvin Gastelum. So he was on the season with Jimmy Quinlan on The Ultimate Fighter. And, Kelvin just doesn't give a fuck. He's so awesome. There's just something about him. He wins fights. I don't exactly know what it is, but he just wins fights.
He just gets MMA. He gets the transition points. He's not stuck in a silo for a particular point in a fight. He's every discipline blends together for him in a very natural way. It feels like since day one he's been focusing on transitions between disciplines more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is, like, you always talk about, like, these intangibles. Like, for a long time, people have said that, there was something about me that just, I won fights. Like, I would go against guys that had better stand-up, better wrestling, better jiu-jitsu, better athletes, stronger, faster, the whole deal, and I would still find a way to win fights. And I really feel like Kelvin's the same way. I didn't think he was going to take down Ellenberger. I was sitting there talking to my friends before the fight, and and I really honestly I don't know who has the better credentials. But just thinking about Kelvin versus thinking about Jake, I was thinking that Jake was going to have the wrestling advantage. And I didn't think Kelvin was going to take him down, and then Kelvin got in really deep and took Jake down, and I'm like, well, that he kind of it was a good example of kind of how straight up wrestling is different than wrestling for MMA. He got in on Jake came forward with punches, Kelvin got in on him, took him down, and I kind of like, all right, he probably won't get him down again. That was kind of a little bit of a mistake on Jake's part. It won't happen again. But then later on, Jake takes down Kelvin, and just Kelvin just out wrestled him, and that was what it really came down to. I just think that Kelvin just wins. It's awesome, because I think that he's probably not the most dominant guy in the practice room. I talked to Jimmy, and he said Kelvin's good, but Kelvin wasn't the best on their team. He wasn't, he would do well against Kelvin wrestling and jiu-jitsu and stand up and everywhere, but Kelvin goes out and wins the show, and Kelvin gets it done, So, and I think that's good. I think that he really turns it up on fight night, and and those are the kind of guys I want to watch. I don't care if they're this gym warrior and they're the best in the gym. I don't care. I want to see guys who are gonna show up to fight, and Kelvin always shows up to fight. It's awesome.
Yeah, he's a game night player. He's a guy that you can count on to come through when the lights are on bright. So look at that switch at the very end. Ellenberger goes to a rear waist lock, picks him up, dumps him. And to me, like you said, it was like, okay, that was kind of that was kind of a fluke in the beginning when Kelvin got the takedown and appeared for a flash to be the better wrestler, because we all know how solid Jake Ellenberger is in that department. And then he hits that switch, and to me it happens so fast that it's hard, even if I rewatch it, to appreciate the subtleties at play to getting position switched like that. He basically ends up in a front headlock and then takes the back. And to me, the error for Ellenberger was in allowing him to take the back. It seemed like he didn't try to stop that rotation clockwise around his body. But first, talk about the switch. How does Gastelum end up getting taken down by his waist and then have the momentum and the position totally turned around?
So I think a lot of it was just the fact that, a lot of times in wrestling or fights or whatever, whenever there's any kind of scramble, which that's what it was a scramble. It was scrambles whenever, they hit the ground and you're immediately trying to work and trying to, get the advantage. I think that it was end of the round. There was only like 20 or 30 seconds left, 20 seconds left, I think. 20 seconds left. Ellenberger shoots a takedown, trying to, secure, get some points to win the round. And he's expecting to take down Kelvin, and Kelvin's going to, just kind of give up and just not do anything. But instead, Kelvin hits the switch. Kelvin takes it back. Before he knows what's going on, he's like, all right, I just have to defend myself. And before he knows it, he's under the chin, and he's getting choked out. And I like that. I like guys that fight to the very last second of the round. I think that it was a case of Ellenberger, not really resting or taking it easy, but was just thinking, I'm gonna hit this takedown, and Kelvin was just 2 steps ahead.
Yeah, it was interesting on the replay. You could kind of see Ellenberger thinking through what his hand positioning should be when he realized that all of a sudden, when he sort of appeared to least expect it, he was in peril, and he kind of went like this, like he was, should I grab the leg? No, I'll protect the head. And then there was almost a moment, almost like a high Japan moment from the Shinya Aoki fight, where his arms are just out front and his neck is wide open, and I just couldn't understand why Ellenberger wouldn't just be protecting the neck the whole time.
It's one of those things where it happens so fast. It's tough. Generally when someone's on your back and you're trying to defend a rear naked choke, you almost want to rear naked choke yourself, because your hand can block the path. This hand can defend, and and this is how I would do it when the choke is coming from this side. But when it's coming the other side, you're switching. So it's kind of one of those things where, when you hit the ground, you got to kind of think for a second. Okay, where's the choke coming from? So a lot of times you bring your hands both kind of up, and you get your shoulders high, you get your chin down, and they choose a side, and then you start defending or whatever you're going to start doing. And honestly, I think Ellenberger just didn't get a chance. Kelvin just sunk the choke in really, really deep and quick. Yep. It's a lot easier to defend something when someone kind of, they secure and they're on your back, then they start working this hand around, and then they start trying to get at the choke and all this other stuff, as opposed to Kelvin just didn't have any choke set and just all of a sudden just sunk everything and then was tight right away. And that's really tough to get away from. I think that, it's tough too. Like I said, end of the round, you're tired. A lot of times, I know for me, usually the first round is the round I use the most energy, just because you kind of get all that nervous energy out a little bit. It's like once you're in the groove of things, it's a lot easier to kind of keep going. The first round is usually where I expend more energy than I will in the second or third. Once you're through the first, it's like, okay, now you've found your pace, you found where you want to be, and that carries you through to the second and third. But sometimes that first round is when you really need the rest the most.
You mentioned that where's it coming from moment when you're defending the choke. Is it kind of like a soccer goalie where you have to hazard a guess, and if you go the wrong way, you're screwed, but you have to pick a way to go. You have to go in one direction or the other?
Yeah, for sure. You kind of have to make a good idea. If I'm here and the choke comes from the opposite side, I'm still okay. My hands are still all in the way, so now I can switch and I can do all the stuff I need to do. But you definitely gotta, you would like to pick the right side right off the bat. So sometimes, you're waiting for it, but you gotta move. You gotta hope that you're right. It's the same thing, like you said, in soccer, hockey, anything like that. There's a lot of times when you have a really good idea where it's going to come, and sometimes you're going to wait, but sometimes you're just, especially if it's like a second or third attempt, you just got to go for it.
It was great to see so many submissions, in particular on the UFC show. It seems like for some reason, and this happens all the time in MMA, especially in the UFC, where in a short period of time, a lot of guys start using a particular technique or method of finishing, and it seems like that there's a renaissance of a particular type of fighting or a particular type of offense. And lately it seems like what's really, really getting sharper across all weight classes is the killer instinct on the submission attempt, not during necessarily a prolonged jiu-jitsu exchange where both guys are trying to chest play with each other, but immediately after a switch or immediately after a knockdown, like we saw from Ricardo Lamas. Have you been seeing more of that? That seems to be a huge part of the game now, is having that in you to immediately go for the killer submission, like we talked about last week with Luke Rockhold and Michael Bisping, as soon as you have the guy in trouble from another discipline, not necessarily jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is, you know, like, so I'm a big fan of jiu-jitsu, just in general. Like, I love jiu-jitsu, and I have tons of submissions. But I don't set them up like a jiu-jitsu guy. I'm constantly hitting people using ground and pound, and I think that I'm a little bit, I don't want to say I'm better, but I think I just have more experience.
You're better. Yeah, well, you could say you're better. That's one way you could put it.
I think that I have a little bit more experience about setting up my submissions with punches and ground and pound. You know, like if I went and did like a sports jiu-jitsu tournament, like I think I would do okay, but not as nearly as good as I would do in like the UFC, like with a grappling match or submissions and stats and all that kind of stuff. But I think that, you know, a lot more people are realizing that, okay, if I keep punching, I'm gonna wear out I'm gonna use a lot of energy. You know, when you're throwing your punches, you're using a lot of energy. But if I hurt them bad and then they expose their neck, I'm gonna immediately take it, and I'm gonna immediately, submit them. It's kind of like, for me, like if I have mount or something and I'm trying to get an arm lock and I'm working really hard, and then all of a sudden I can elbow them in the face. That's what I'm gonna do, and I think that. I think people are just, kind of catching up on everything and realizing that, look, these submissions are here. I have to train enough of them before the fight so that I can take advantage of them. And it kind of gets tough because there's so many submissions that you can train. Like I have a lot of jiu-jitsu experience, and there's still 8,000 submissions that I have a lot of reps in, but I don't have enough reps in. I don't have the same amount of reps as like my A-list moves. Like the moves that I really, really like. I have a couple of them from every position, but there's tons of other moves that will present themselves that if I don't have enough reps in the gym, then it's kind of tough to gamble and take that chance during a fight. Like, okay, if I go for this, I'm going to end up on bottom. But
shouldn't everyone just then focus on the rear naked choke, because that's the one? Unless you're really good at the arm bar like you are, it's all about the rear naked choke. It seems like, I don't know, I haven't looked at the stats, but it seems like 75% of the time it's about the rear naked choke.
Yeah, I mean, I think rear naked choke, I would bet guillotine is up there. Guillotine's there all the time. Like Kimuras are pretty rare. Omoplatas are super rare.
Joint locks are kind of, I don't know. If I was starting right now and I had to pick something to rep the most, it would be rear naked chokes and guillotines, because those are the fight finishers now. It's too hard to just rip a guy's arm off anymore. You just don't see it as often.
Yeah, I mean, there's also like a lot of like, I feel like guillotine is such like a broad thing, because there's like what's called a specific guillotine, but then there's all kinds of variations. There's 10-finger guillotines, there's single arm guillotines, there's all no arm guillotine, there's there's all kinds of different options. So it's if I had to pick one, I would probably go with the guillotine, because anytime you shoot and or someone sprawls and you end up in a front headlock, guillotine's your move, guillotine's your guy. But yeah, rear naked choke is right there too. Because, the thing about rear naked choke is a lot of times if you have someone's back, sometimes you can choke, but sometimes you're better off just punch. It's a really dominant position for punching and submissions. Whereas guillotine, it's like if I get someone a front headlock, like there's a lot of things I can do, but I can't really punch that well from there. I can try to take the back, but if I got really, really good at the guillotine, then I'm not worried about that. I'm submitting them and I'm walking around with my hands raised up.
Speaking of guillotines toward a finish, Ricardo Lamas styling on Dennis Bermudez, breaking his 7-fight win streak in Mexico City last night. What about that guillotine? The announcers remarked, and I think appropriately so, that a key part of it was the way to which he swung off to one side. Didn't so much place himself, squared up with Bermudez's body, but made sure he swung off to the side. What's the significance of that?
So in most guillotines, you don't want to be completely square. You want to have an angle. So like one move that we always call, and I don't even know what it's called, but if we call it guillotine guard. So if I have someone especially like a head and arm guillotine, I want their body off to my right side. So I'll use my right leg to kind of like put like my shin across like their ribs and kind of keep them off to the side. Like I don't want them squared up in the middle, because that's when they're kind of like in a neutral kind of state where they're able to. I can't really get the best angle. They're kind of neutral on me. But if I get my shin across like their ribs, I kind of push them off to the side, and that just makes the guillotine way worse. And then your other leg comes over the top and it blocks them out. And for most guillotines, a lot of times it's the angle. I think a long time ago, the guillotine was all about trying to just be stronger. And if you got a good bite in the neck, then there was no way they were getting away. But I think now it's guys are getting a lot better at defending the guillotines. Guys aren't panic tapping. Like I think a long time ago, guys would panic tap all the time, where they're like, oh shit, I'm in trouble. And then
Right.
they would start tapping the second someone was on their neck, and they're not getting choked. They realize that they're caught. They're panicking, thinking they're gonna get seriously hurt. They're in a submission,
Yeah.
and whereas I think now it's like, okay, I've been in 8,000 guillotines. I know how to defend this. I'm getting better. So now you need a little bit deeper knowledge of what's going on. You'll still get some guys that just, their arm is just like a vice, and they snatch it up, and you're not going anywhere, and there's nothing you can do about it. But I think that there's a lot of guys that are getting better at defending, overall, and I think it was just a case of you got a good angle, and he made him pay for it.
On that angle, put me on the other side of that choke. Put me in Dennis Bermudez's position. What's the difference between the pressure I feel on my neck if I'm square with the guy and the angle?
The big thing is you feel like you can't fight it. That's the big thing. It's like,
I see.
generally when you're in a regular guillotine, you're able to look your head up a little bit, tuck your shoulders. You're able to kind of drive your shoulder in on them. Like if someone's got me in a guillotine, generally whichever shoulder is like to their center. So if my head's on this side of them, I drive this shoulder into them, and I can really get a lot of weight and kind of like pin them to the ground. And really, it makes it really, really tough for them to get much pressure on the guillotine. And maybe I'm stuck for a little bit, and it takes me a few seconds to work my way out. But if I see someone jump guard in a guillotine, and the other person starts digging their inside shoulder into their chest, I'm thinking that they're generally okay. Sometimes they'll still get tapped, but generally they're okay. But when someone gets off to the side like that, it's like now there's no place for you to drive your shoulder. Your head is not being stuffed down, but it's almost like it's being pushed like down towards like your knees and your hips, and it's way, way worse. It's just to a point where you feel like you can't fight it. Like on the first example, when your shoulders in the chest, you feel like it's your neck. Like you're able to align your neck properly. You're able to resist a little bit. It kind of comes down to how good their technique is with kind of pinching on your neck versus how strong your neck is and how you can get good alignment, things like that. But if they get you off to the side, like you're in a lot of trouble. Matt Arroyo used a great example. So I train Matt Arroyo a lot. He's down at Gracie Tampa South in Tampa, and he's come up and done seminars in my gym and stuff like that. And I've trained with him a bunch. And he used a great example, and it helped my guillotines a ton. Whenever you can get them off to the side, it's almost like you're taking a hose and like you're pinching the hose, and it's just you're really stuffing the head. And it really made a big difference for me about just how I visualize it in my brain. And their neck is that hose, and you're just putting a tight kink in it, and that happens because you're stuffing the head down, and it helps a ton, and it makes a big difference. And you can't even fight it. You think you have a strong neck and things like that, but it does you no good.
Remember that Dan Miller guillotine in the IFL where he folded the guys? That's exactly it. That's the fire hose, right? That's the garden hose, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so that was, people don't know. Dan Miller caught a guy in a guillotine. They were standing. Pushed him into the fence, turned his head sideways, and like lifted him up. And basically had like his ear going like lower than his shoulder. Like it was bad. Like, I thought like broken neck for sure.
The forehead was touching the sternum. It was up against the ropes in that IFL ring, and he was just muscling him forward as he went, and you just couldn't believe the angle that head bent at, that neck.
Just super, super nasty.
All right, so let's talk about the jab that set up that guillotine from Ricardo Lamas. We see a lot of jabs. We see jabs all the time, and they bloody guys up, they mess guys up, they throw them off. But what is it about a jab that can drop somebody like Dennis Bermudez, who's got a chin?
So it's a couple things. One, it's timing. It's it's about kind of like everyone has like a little bit of a natural kind of pace themselves, a natural rhythm, and when you kind of figure out the other person, that's why you always talk about, you always have like that feeling out process. You're figuring out a bunch of things. You're figuring out what they're doing with their feet. You're figuring out, do they take a big breath before they go to throw a punch? Do they have some kind of like sign of like, okay, they tap this foot, or they do this, or they tap their gloves, or whatever. And tons of people have different like little tendencies and things like that. So a lot of times the feeling out process is figuring out reach and all that kind of stuff, but it's also trying to kind of pay attention and figure out their rhythm a little bit. And a lot of times, whoever can disrupt the other person's rhythm is going to be successful. And I think that so timing of the jab is really, really good, and not just putting it out there and just like pushing it, but actually giving it good snap, good placement. A jab hits someone in the forehead most of the time versus the nose versus the chin versus the eye is all gonna have different results. So I think he's doing a good job. I think he was mixing up. He's hitting good spots, good location. He was being quick with it. He was hitting the timing, and that's the difference between someone that's got an okay jab and someone's got like a really good jab. And that's why like fighting a guy like like a John Jones or something like that that's so long. If they have a really good jab, it's hell all night long. You're having trouble because you never really get to where you can punch them, and they're just constantly hitting you and disrupting your rhythm, and you never really get to find a groove because every single time you start to get close, they're screwing you up, they're knocking you off.
With that kind of pop in the jab and that kind of instinctual fight-ending grappling, how do you think a fight between Lamas and Conor McGregor looks?
I think Conor McGregor is like really impressive. I don't think Conor's as good as he talks, but I think Conor is very, very impressive. And he's got great boxing. He does all kinds of like weird, crazy stuff that not a lot of other people are doing. I love how he kind of leans forward and comes up with that uppercut. I think that's an awesome shot. Like he does a whole bunch of things that are like really like different. Like his footwork is different. Like that's a guy. Like good luck trying to figure out Conor McGregor right off the bat. Like you have to watch a lot of tape and try to figure him out. And he still does so much stuff. He has a lot of variety in what he likes to do. It's going to be really, really tough to kind of figure him out. But I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid 100%. I don't think that he's gonna win the belt at 45 and come up to 55 and all this other stuff like as easily as he says he is. But he's a guy I always want to watch. And he talks up the fights. He does a great job, and he's backed it up. He's been really impressive. All
right,
he's good.
There it is. So that's featherweight, and Ricardo Lamas putting himself right back in line with a fantastic showing and fantastic instincts against Dennis Bermudez. You got your lowdown on how Fabricio Verdum was able to do what he did against Mark Hunt, and the praises of one Kelvin Gastelum sung substantially here on our second installment of the lowdown. So Joe, anything for the people before we let them continue with their Sunday?
No, just thanks for everyone checking in. Like I said, we can keep this kind of informal. I know that there's definitely little things that we're going to do better and better each week. But we're working on it. It's kind of just like a kind of a fun thing for us to do. We're not trying to do anything crazy with it. So any kind of feedback, good, bad, whatever. We'd love to hear from you guys. Like I'm on Twitter. We're gonna post this on Reddit. However, I'll post it on Facebook. All this kind of stuff. Like we're reading all the comments. We might not respond to every single person, but we're reading the comments. We're taking them to heart, and we're gonna try to get better. And I think that a lot of people are kind of like, we're not trying to be like the next Joe Rogan Experience. People are like, oh, you need to hire a producer. You need to do this. Like, look, guys, I'm hanging out down in my basement. We're just talking. We're hanging out. And we're just trying to give some insight, just have fun, like almost like a little bit more in-depth Twitter, I guess. Get some thoughts down for you guys. So, but
it's called Google Hangout after all.
Yeah, what we're doing is Google Hangout, really really high tech.
All right, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week for another episode of that lowdown.